Well, welcome everybody. Hello and welcome to Griselda Art House and our Tuesday Talks program. For our current show, Oh Marilyn, a group exhibition that looks at female emancipation in the UK and US in the 1960s. We're delighted to be joined by artists Jann Haworth and Slinger. And both artists are in conversation with feminist art historian Griselda Pollock. We're very, very excited about this event, and we're really pleased that you could all join us. Before we begin, can you please ensure your microphones are muted? There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. We'll do a Q&A at the end. And there may also be some images of an explicit nature too. So if you've got young people out there who might be shocked or other, I don't know. Anyway, it could be coming. Yeah, before we kick off, I just give a brief sort of intro to the speakers. Griselda Pollock is a feminist art historian and cultural analyst of international post-colonial feminist studies in the visual arts and visual culture. Since the 1970s, Pollock has been one of the most influential scholars of modern, avant-garde, postmodern and contemporary art. She's a major influence in feminist theory, feminist art history and gender studies. She's published over 25 books and many articles and is the recent recipient of the Holberg Prize. Jann Haworth is an artist whose work has been exhibited in major museums around the world and is included in the permanent collections of institutions such as Tate Modern, the Walker Art Center and the Smithsonian Institution, amongst others. Although she continues to produce and exhibit new work, for our current show, we've chosen to present a selection of iconic soft sculptures of Jann's from the 1960s. We're also delighted to be joined by Slinger. Penny's a British-born artist and author based in California. As an artist, she has worked in different mediums, including photography, film, and sculpture. Her work has been described as being in the genres of surrealism and feminist surrealism, and her work explores the nature of the self, the feminine, and the erotic. There's lots more to talk about all of these people, but I don't want to take up too much of your time with my waffling. So I will leave you guys in the capable hands of Griselda, Penny, and Jann. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George, so very much. It's an enormous honor to be here and a delight to be back at Griselda with this wonderful exhibition. My pleasure today and this evening is to be talking to two remarkable artists, Jann Haworth and Penny Slinger, whose work we're going to kind of view between the kind of prisms of the early 60s, and they both worked through the 60s and the early 70s. Both have played an enormous part in transforming the materials, the methods, and the making of art, as well as enriching art with perspectives which challenge decades, centuries-long ways of representing women, but also are brilliantly coordinating their innovative, transformative, and inventive ways of making art to introduce women's voices, women's bodies, women's subjectivity, women's experiences into an art world aware and deeply aware of the variety of different media in which art came to be made once, as it were, the grand, aristocrat of painting took a side step and allowed the use of media, photography, contemporary materials, soft sewing, embroidery, photography, and performance. So I want to start by going back to my own personal history in 1973. I'm so thrilled to see Penny Slinger on the other side of a screen, on the other side of the world in front of me, because I remember so well that the shock and the excitement and the kind of bubble of discussion that went through the early feminist circles when I was still a rookie sort of graduate student trying to make my way into understanding where women were in the history of art, because they got left out, but where they were now and what they were doing. And actually seeing the show at the Angela Flowers Gallery in 1973, and if I could see the next image, please, reading the fact that this was reviewed not only later by Peter Fuller and people, but by Laura Mulvey, the person who became one of the major feminist filmmakers and was already making her own critical films. And she wrote about this in Spare Rib, drawing on a psychoanalysis and understanding the meaning of the intervention that Penny had been made in terms of a transformation of a certain surrealist legacy and an innovation in terms of media coming together, in terms of exploring women's fantasies and desires. It's not images of the body, but the body as it's lived, as it challenges how it's been imaged and is reclaimed. So it's called The Whole Truth, which, as you can see when you see the exhibition, you can see she's picking up on the whole question of orality, as well as the wonderful kind of work that really absolutely shocked us and got my feminist, art group discussing, particularly the wedding cake and so we're opening up the kind of wonderful, delightful, critical humor, but edged with a sense of what is somehow the violence that was hidden behind the rituals of wedding. Could I have the next one, please? And I'm so delighted to meet Jann again. I had a wonderful conversation with her from a previous show, and my admiration and my knowledge of her work is deepening every time I have these opportunities. And I'm introducing her because she may be very well known to you, or should be even better known to you, for having been the co-designer of the famous cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, an absolutely iconic album. And if you could press the button again, please, Piga, we'll see, if you look much more closely, there is also a hook to this evening's topic and the conversation around the exhibition's title. If you home in between Ringo and Paul, you pass by Johnny Weissmuller, if you used to be a Tarzan fan, and you will see right there, Marilyn Monroe is present. Now, Marilyn Monroe doesn't figure largely in Jann Haworth's work for good reasons, because she's one of the people who's taking on a completely different take about the idea of the women and bodies, but in a creative way. If I could have the next one, please. But this serves as a kind of hook to come back to the fact, because this show, Oh Marilyn, is marking the 60th anniversary of the death of Marilyn Monroe, a death that is now not considered to be a suicide, but death by medical misadventure with a double dosing of incompatible drugs by doctors who did not consult each other on the night that she took them. So the tragedy of losing this brilliant young woman, one of the most kind of creative forces in Hollywood, who's been presented only as the body and the image and sexuality, but I'm writing a book that myself is looking at a white working class woman making her way in one of the major cultural industries of the 1950s. But the year 1962 is a year of mourning for the death of Marilyn Monroe. But I put this little collage together to remind you where we are in the 1960s, if you were not like me living through it. We see Playboy magazine has come into being. Life is one of the great places where even Jackson Pollock and women artists are talked about. There are magazines dealing with the experience of African-American artists, and I've got, therefore, you've got a cover with the First Lady of the United States and her guest. It's the year that Nelson Mandela was arrested and began his long years of imprisonment, and the meaning that apartheid was still a major force and did not get abolished until the early 1990s. The president was President Kennedy, and on Life magazine, it's reminding us of the terrible thalidomide misadventure, medical misadventure, which caused pregnant women to take a drug that caused a malformation of the limbs in their babies. And here is Kennedy congratulating the woman who identified was the whistleblower on this. You can see his counterpart is Khrushchev. It's still the great era of the Soviet Union. It's the era of the space race. Winston Churchill is just about still alive, harking back to the 19th century almost. And Prince Charles, who the future King of England, was just a young schoolboy. And of course, we were all being transformed by music, particularly music, and the excitement here are the Beatles, 1962. Could I have the next one, please? But Marilyn Monroe's death caused rippled through the world. It was one of the most shocking events, so unexpected. The possibility that it was suicide turned it into a great drama of her possible self-destruction and misery, even though, as I say, we think now that it isn't the case. Could we have the next one, please? And it was blasted around the even Times. Can we go on to the next image? Yeah, even, in absolute sort of, it was headline news. And it was received in the art world as well. It resonated, it echoed in the art world. Next one, please. Through, of course, one of the most famous memorials created to this young white working class woman who, like the young working class white man, Andy Warhol, was struggling to make their world in an edgy, difficult, place their way in the world in an edgy, difficult, and quite exclusive and exploitative, both the cinema and the art world. And although people think of this as the beginning of kind of spectacularization of the image of Marilyn Monroe and pop art, it actually is a very religious icon borrowed from Czech icons that Andy Warhol knew, and also presented in a sense as a memorial, which he worked on over and over and over again for almost 2 months in the period 62. But lesser known, please, thank you very much, is another artist, Pauline Boty, one of these the artists in the exhibition, who herself died extremely young in very, very tragic circumstances, only 28. But she immediately, in responding to an image on Town magazine, you can see, which was a part of the a very unglamorous, as it were, very lively, natural photo shoot on the beach at Santa Monica by George Barris. This is possibly one of the last photographs taken of Marilyn Monroe, but a smiling, a sense of this absolute radiant loveliness of Marilyn Monroe, not the sexiness, but the joyous liveliness of this beautiful, beautiful woman, which is taken up and given a different kind of iconicity by Pauline Boty in her piece, Color Her Gone, made just a few months after her death. And the next one, please. Oh, we've missed one out. There we are, thank you very much. And she went back in 1963 to The Only Blonde in the World, one of her most famous paintings, which takes a scene from Some Like It Hot, made in 1959, one of the penultimate films of Marilyn Monroe. We see her sitting on the set. The set, or the production, was in fact designed by Jann Haworth, very famous and renowned production designer Ted Haworth, for Billy Wilder's film, and the little Jann Haworth, as a little girl, was taken to the set and wandered around and met Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller, which I think is a lovely, lovely connection directly with this. But in that terrible scene at the end where Marilyn Monroe has to sort of teeter, it's actually the middle scene where she has to run in high heels to join Tony Curtis on the boat in this amazing dress, and she may tell you a story about the dress later. Can I have the next one, please? Pauline Boty, however, by dying, disappeared from view. And while we have secured the archive and cultivated the names of the major British artists from the 1950s and 60s, her work was left in a storage, and it was sort of kept in the family, but not very much shown. But in the early 70s, when I was first doing my feminist research, I had a huge Betamax tape. I'm showing you a finger, the thickness of the videotape that I had of this film called Pop Goes the Easel, which was made to celebrate this extraordinary moment in 1962 in British art. Now, Jann Haworth came to London from, actually directly from Paris, but having been studying at UCLA in the United States, having grown up in Hollywood in 1961, and became part of this incredible excitement that was running through the Slade School of Art, the RCA, Chelsea, all the London art schools, St. Martin's. It was a hothouse in so many different ways, and livened up by the engagement and this new kind of culture. But Pauline Boty mostly disappeared. The first big exhibition was in 2013, and a publication in 2019 has brought her back into view. And so I'm delighted that her work is with us. Can I show just the next two slides? No, let's go to the pop list. Now I'm going to share my screen for a moment for you to take a few minutes just to get the feeling of the 1960s in a television program, which you may wince at, made for BBC.
Good evening. Our program tonight consists of one single film that we made about 4 young artists. They're 4 painters who turn for their subject matter to the world of pop art, the world of the popular imagination, the world of film stars, the twist, science fiction, pop singers, a world which you can dismiss if you feel so inclined, of course, as being tawdry and second rate, but a world all the same, in which everybody, to some degree anyway, lives, whether we like it or not. Film stars aren't film stars for nothing, nor are they received as film stars for no reason at all. Anyway, as far as these 4 painters are concerned, it's a world packed with its own mythology, its own heroes, its own heroines, its own laughter, its own poetry, and they approach it with the utmost relish. The first, and I suppose in some senses the leader of the group, is Peter Blake. Blake is 29. He comes from Dartford in Kent, where his father is an electrician.
We need to go back to I stop sharing. Can we go back to the PowerPoint, please, again? I couldn't resist showing you that, and even including, in a sense, that piece of music just to bring back the atmosphere. And also here, I just wanted to show before I move, give the microphone over to my colleagues, that what Pauline Botti was making there were collages, and this whole thing about collage going back to collage from the beginning of the 20th century, going back to Dada, going back to the sort of Hannah Höch, the whole rich kind of moment of fantastic art rather than, you know, abstraction, is not just, as Hugh Weldon showed it, something about only just dealing with the kind of popular world in case you don't like it, but actually the vitality and the excitement that was there. Can I have the next one, please, which is another piece by Pauline Botti. Again, very beautifully formalist analysis one could have here, and this little gesture of the baby's hand and the adult's hand, the icon, but also this is with a color advertisement. Of course, everybody loves a blonde. Next one, please. But when I had a conversation with Jann Haworth preparing for this, she very much brought to my mind a sense that when she arrived in London, the thing that seemed to be animating and inspiring the young artists in the art schools that she was attending right across London was not popular culture, but theatre, particularly a new kind of theatre, what was called the angry young men, a whole raft of young men coming not from the kind of posh Hugh Weldon classes, but speaking back to a world of white, mostly working class experience outside of London. If you remember, it says Peter comes from Birmingham, as if this was a place slightly off a mat. But you think of Saturday night and Sunday morning set with the bicycle. We worked in the bicycle factories in Nottingham, or Room at the Top, and this kind of British New wave of cinema also was based, could I have the next one please, of a whole range of plays. I'm sorry, I think we've lost Beckett and Osborne and Look Back in Anger, that whole generation of the 1950s, Arnold Wesker, shown particularly at the Royal Court Theatre, a place that many of the artists went to, but also a certain kind of lovely lyrical humor in things like The Knack, A Taste of Honey, or Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment. These are very iconic films of the 60s, but equally a kind of this social realism. Jann told me she had dinner with John Berger, who was an advocate for this as it moved into contemporary art as well, in voices of what women's experience was like. And Cathy Come Home was one of the most poignant films, and indeed originally plays of that time, about homelessness and poverty and class and abuse. Can I have the next one, please? And just as I round this off, I want to bring back that there was another blonde. Marilyn was not the only other blonde in the world, of course, but in a sense, for anybody thinking about this question of women's voices, the women really changing the landscape of understanding of what the life and work experiences of women, someone like Sylvia Plath, who also died tragically, but we know did commit suicide after suffering a long battle with depression, and writing the most extraordinary book about her experiences inside the bell jar of depression, even writing it under a pseudonym. The bell jar originally appeared under a pseudonym, later published as the bell jar. So we bring together in this exhibition some very wonderfully lively, creative, diverse material methodologies and media artists engaging with the vernacular world, the world of film and theatre and literature and culture and popular culture and music. But also we bring together 4 extraordinary artists in terms of their inventiveness: Jann Haworth, Pauline Boty, Penny Slinger, and Judy Chicago, who is not with us. But let's turn now to hearing from Jann and Penny about their own work. Thank you for your attention. And cinema, just remember cinema, 2 key films I wanted us to think about. One is Some Like It Hot, which we've seen in Penny, in Pauline Boty's work, and we'll come back to the Invasion of the Body Snatchers and its significance for the child of Hollywood who became such an amazing artist, Jann Haworth. So over to you, Jann.
Well, thank you. There's so much to talk about. I don't know where to begin. Can we pause on the previous one a minute? Just to sort of set the table up with the way I approach work and how I have used different materials in a kind of adventure to expand perhaps the frontier, I hope, of the way people produce art. In the 60s, I made this figure in 1962. It wasn't quite finished for the Young Contemporaries show. I would want to mention the Young Contemporaries as a launching pad for many artists in the early 60s. The year before I showed in Young Contemporaries, David Hockney, Peter Phillips, and Derek Bosher certainly starred in the show. And that was also the year of Pop Goes the Easel, when those artists kind of first came forward. And it was miraculous to me as a young Californian girl to come into London and find that there was such a prestigious venue for young students. You know, it presented an opportunity that certainly was not present in Los Angeles at the time. And the fact that, you know, young students were able to produce their work, sell their work, exhibit their work was just revolutionary to me. At the same time, as we've mentioned before, I personally was very intrigued by the theater. I come from a theater family on my father's side. And so the theater, to me, was a launching pad really for so much of this. We think of the 1960s as belonging to the Beatles, but really the predecessors that set the stage literally and figuratively, I think, were the playwrights Osborne, Wesker, Beckett and The Angry Young Men and Jeremy Sanford and so forth, because they allowed the working class to speak, and they said that the spotlight belonged on people, the narratives, the stories of people who, after the war, had changed position relative to the upper classes in England. So all of this was something that I found very intriguing. I can't say that I was so aware of working class versus middle class versus upper class, because I wasn't prepared for that notion. I didn't feel it in California, and it wasn't something that I paid much attention to as far as being a problem, which in some ways, we know it was and still is in certain ways. So, and likewise, I think feminism, I didn't know I wasn't equal. I came from a culture that women were employed doing all kinds of glamorous and fulfilling jobs in Los Angeles as designers, as actresses, as writers, and so forth. So, so the London I came into, some of it I didn't see. These pieces are picking up on the blonde that means a lot to me, which is Mae West. And her appeal to me is really her brain and the kind of wit that she brought to film as a kind of counter to the glamorous, in her own way, glamorous. And I love that individuality. Can we go on? The piece in the middle is actually in the exhibition at Gazzelli now. The piece to the right is part of the Scottish National Museum of Modern Art in Edinburgh. And the piece on the left is also in the exhibition. It's a pom-pom girl mid-stride. Again, cloth, and that's bas relief. The Lindner in the middle is a take on two of Richard Lindner's pictures that I wanted to bring into reality by combining the back view of this figure and the front view. The original was bought by E.L.T. Messens after his wife died, and he took her to various events in a taxi. Can we go on? Next slide, yeah. The donuts is something that has they've been a part of my work since I was a student. This one was kind of catching up with art history, and I liked the idea that I would turn male work into donuts. So it's art historical reference in donut form. I had to break the strictly male illusion here, because I needed to do a donut by Merritt Oppenheim, a fur donut to go with her fur teacup, and I had to do Yoko Ono in her black bag with her husband. But donuts, to me, are very subversive. What you see is not what everything I'm saying, and they make me laugh. And I think both Penny and I have a stripe of kind of sly humor in most of our pieces. Next slide. Next one. Frank is part of the next slide, if you could go to that. In 1963, I was chosen to be in the For Young Painters show at the ICA. And for me, I didn't do an installation. That word hadn't been used yet in conjunction with art, but I did a set, much like Barney's Beanery. I think we both of us had the same sort of notion, having grown up in LA. I was used to sets and props and stand-ins and false things. I love the surrealism of Hollywood. That it runs all the way through my work, and Body Snatchers would be certainly appropriate to have a conversation about that film and this piece. I was on the set of Body Snatchers a lot, and it has a poetic meaning to me that perhaps is slightly skewed from the attention about McCarthyism and so forth. So next slide. We got it? This is a series of invisible women. We'll go on a little bit down this path with the invisible women. I love it that Penny wrote a book called Visible Women. That's so cool. I was first employing vinyl here so that the wall that the work hung on could be part of the piece. And just say a quick little word about, in 1997, I got a Churchill Fellowship to travel to the United States. And my mind was dealing with the idea that I wanted to find a new way of expressing what I consider to be the 4 cardinal concerns of fine art, which is the still life, portrait, the nude, and the landscape. And I thought I could perhaps invent new form to look at those particular concerns of artists again in a fresh way. So I wanted a new kind of innovation, which is different than what I was doing in the 60s, but still using canvas as fabric and not so much as fine art materials that you then put paint on. So next slide. Exploding Invisible Woman. This is all vinyl, an invisible woman made of transparent fabric. Next slide. And this is Invisible Woman 9. It's impossible to photograph. It's 2 layers and it's 9 areas that women are made invisible. And it's each patch area is to do with a different zone of making of art, from tattoos to abstract expressionism. Next slide. And this is the largest of the set, an invisible woman, and she echoes the pom-pom girl that's in the Griselda show. And I think also ties to Penny's work in this kind of celebratory moment that you are completely exposed with your arms like this, but you're also celebrating your independence. Next slide. A series of corsets. I'd love to talk about this more, but I'm very conscious of the time. I was really interested in the idea that canvases are stretched over a frame and that a corset is contracting the body into a shape that is, decided by culture to be, this is the shape we want to have. This piece refers to the Acid Queen in the rock opera by The Who. I still think that music stands up almost better than anything. Love that, the concept of a rock opera. And again, Acid Queen with a kind of faded Union Jack in the back. Next slide. We can clip through these next ones quite quickly. These are all corsets, and let's stop on the last polka dot one. So these are all corsets and hermaphrodites. Next slide. This one's, pause just a minute. This is Minnie Mouse after her divorce and before she knew she was pregnant. That moment in a woman's life, which I really wanted to celebrate. And I did several of the mini corsets. It was really to sort of point out the fact that Minnie is actually African-American, and she also is, in this case, again, her arms up and liberated, and that we've gravely misunderstood her position. She was not married to Mickey, yet she had children. It's a wonderful story to kind of explode, I think, in cartoon form, and we think of it as great innocence, and really it has all sorts of subtext, which I find really amusing. Next slide. This is Mannequin Defectors, and it set the stage for a series of works that I did with community murals. Next one. This is one I'd like to pause for just a split second. This was really, the genesis of this was that I did not know my history. I didn't know the women upon whose shoulders I stand, or that I don't think that many people did and or do. And so in 2009, I did the previous little comic strip. And from that, I came a deep desire to actually make a mural that cited women that I didn't know, and women that had contributed to culture in a way that we call them catalysts for change in the sciences, art, and social activism. And so this mural is, in this image, 28 feet long. It's now double that size. It's in 7 panels here. And my daughter, Liberty Blake, is the collage artist that put this together. We ran workshops with the community, with YWCA women, with the staff of various museums and the nursing college up at the University of Utah. Each woman made a head that she chose from either a list or from her own interest. And it is a collage graffiti process where you cut a collage from a photograph, and then Liberty then collages that into this form that has some reference to Sgt. Pepper, but really is an apology for some of the errors that are in Sgt. Pepper. Okay, next slide. This one I'll say in advance. Next one is Utah Women Coming Next. Ah, that one. That has 300 heads, and it's 110 feet wide and 55 feet tall. And it's a banner mural that I did with my son, Alex Johnston. And it's on a 7-story building in Utah now. And it is in celebration of women's right to vote 2020. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we suddenly had to go from workshop format to email and create this mural really in single conversations with people all around the world, as it happens now. So it was a huge project done under really arduous conditions. Next one is of Dennis Hopper, quick mural that we did for Picture Line in Salt Lake City. And I could talk about this, but I won't. And I think that's all, isn't it? Oh, this is Mannequin Defectors, so, commenting and reflecting on the DC march that I went with my daughter Daisy, the Women's March in 2017 in protest of the Trump presidency. And that's it, I think. Yes. I think we're over to Penny.
Now we hand over to Penny. Thank you so much, Jann. That was marvelous. Penny.
Hello, thank you. And thank you, Griselda, for all that wonderful cultural context, and to Jann, beautiful presentation, and also the fact that you were so inclusive, both of myself and of all these other women. Is just homage to you as an artist and as a being. So I want to start here with 2 pieces that are from the series that are featured in this exhibition. The one on the left is from the series called Mouthpieces, and they feature photographic collages of my own mouth. And on the right, that's me as a wedding cake in the construction that I made and photographed, and in this one collaged into a piece called All Seeing Eye. And so they kind of sum up the approach that I've taken in wanting to examine how woman is seen and how she sees herself, and to look at more than just superficial, to look inside and see what's going on. Next one, please. So this is the frontispiece of a book that I did in 1969, and it was published in 1971, called 50% The Visible Woman, which Jann was referencing there. And it's my contribution to the experience that I had in finding my thesis material. We can go to the next one. And my thesis was on Max Ernst, and specifically his collage books. And I was absolutely entranced and fell in love with his collage techniques and wanted to use those to explore the psyche of the feminine, because I felt that was sort of missing in the history of art, and that the woman was muse, but to be a woman who was her own muse, and that used the techniques of surrealism, these wonderful tools to probe the subconscious and probe the inner world, and to express that what we're seeing is just the surface. It's only 50% at the most of what's really going on. So I called my book that, and you'll see my handmade book that I made in 69 on the left, the published version in 71. And then as we're having the 60th anniversary for Marilyn, I had a 50-year anniversary of its publication by bringing out a new version of the book now, which combines the 2 versions that came out before. Next one, please. And it's a series of collages and poems, and this one's called Self-Examination, and there's a line in the poem about what divides the men from the boys, define the object, and I'm trying again here to show this idea as an art student of having the model as a woman, but putting oneself in 2 places at once and being that model, the observed as well as the observer. And next one, all the images had poetry overlaid. because I wanted to bring together the idea of the word and the image being intimately connected. And the one in the middle is called Don't Look at Me in That Tone of Voice. And it seems to sum up somewhat of this cancel culture that we're in now. Pass the Parcel was the one on the left. And I'm using myself in these images and images that I found and sourced in any of the material that was around in publications at the time. The next one, please. And so this one is called Circe with the scissors, and I'm again trying to take back the way that the body is seen, and to make even on the right here an androgyne, and reclaim all that mutability of the flesh. And as Laura talked about when she described my exhibition, the world of fantasy, and also all the things that challenge women. And on the left, we have something sourced from the Vietnam War. In the middle, something around pregnancy. It's called The Safe Period. And next one, please. At the same time as doing the book, I was still a student at Chelsea College. I was making these objects. And here we have The Bride in the Bath, which was a life cast of a model I had and covered in the satin and resonated, and then my mummy case, which I made, and that opened up and had all kinds of internal organs and different parts of the body inside. And so it's my beginning to use life casts. Next one, please. And I made a series of head boxes at the time, using a life cast of my head and combining with different images of myself, often photographic. This one called Under Lock and Key was trying to express that kind of box and prison that I, as a young woman coming out into a very male-centric world, felt myself to be in, but I felt the power of expressing that could somehow hold the key, and that we held the key. Next one. And so I made a series of these head boxes. The one on the left is called Ladies, the one on the right, Private, No Admittance. Next one. And this series was, these are more from that, shown at an exhibition at the ICA, much as Jann had an exhibition there. So did I in 1969, part of a show called Young and Fantastic, which Roland Penrose, who had been helping me with my research on Max Ernst, included me in. And next one, please. So I was able to come out from art school and have that showing, and then went on to show at Angela Flower's gallery. And I used a series of dolls and cast them and created them in all kinds of different transformations, with parts of birds, with things embedded in the past resin. Next one. So we have these kind of headless bodies, and we have the head boxes in two different categories, both shown together. And then at the same time, I became part of this all-women's theatre group called Holocaust, run by Jane Arden, which was the first all-women's theatre group. So I was, again, as we were talking about before, interested in theatre and film, and that interleaving and interweaving with the fine art world. So I thought it very important to enter that arena and to express myself as part of this collective. Next one, please. And as we were looking at the soft sculpture, this was my soft sculpture, which I made. It has a life cast of a girl who played the part in The Four Little Girls by Picasso, which Roland Penrose translated, and which was put on at the Open Space Theatre. And Carolee Schneeman and myself did set design for it, and I made several things, of which this rag doll is one of them. Next, please. And this now we're into the opening exhibition, which is 1973, and which the pieces in the show are drawn from this collection of works. And it was really a series of tabletops and mouthpieces. And the tabletops were assemblages, very much focused on the female body, and the mouthpieces were saying, we need to have a mouth. I want to be a mouthpiece for the feminine, which has been so silent for so long. Next one, please. And so this whole series of bringing together the table and the feminine, and Judy Chicago, who is present in the exhibition but not present in our talk, went on a few years later to really used this theme very, very effectively, and that has been an icon of feminist art. But at this time, I was transforming various different archetypal images, and I did a series of wedding cakes. I myself became the wedding cake, but I also transformed a number of wedding cakes with life cast pieces. And you see me with the cake on the left because I put myself in men's magazines because I wanted to insert myself in that field and use my desirability to then make people come and hear what I had to say, which was going to make them think again that I wasn't just some object, but very much the subject of my own reality. Next. And the next one is another wedding cake called the Sugar Bride on the left, and on the right, an assemblage called Happy Anniversary, where the bride and groom are cut down the middle and the doll house inside represents this rather sterile, furnished building where the male and female elements are now no longer in communion. And you'll see behind that I have several of my wedding cake photographs. This is from the exhibition at Angela Flowers Gallery in 1973. Next one. And here's an installation shot showing the wedding cakes and the photographs. Next, please. And this was the invitation to the exhibition. I actually wanted to do an erotic wedding ritual as the opening, but that didn't happen. But that's a whole other story. Next one, please. And then I use this scenario to act out various different little mini dramas of performance art. And here with a boyfriend playing the role of the groom on the left and my girlfriend playing the role of the groom on the right. Next, please. And I made a wedding book, which I made as a kind of send-up of the normal wedding book, and made many collages inside it, added the outside, much as Jann has been using these different materials and the softness. I also incorporated that in many of these works, and in this book too, it's satin and soft. The next one, please. And so there were collages that I made from this glyph of myself as the bride and the cake all in one. I wanted to really look at this, what felt like a very worn out ritual, and re-envision it and reimagine it from my perspective, from my gaze. Next one, please. And here are a number of the other tabletops which I did. As you see, many including life casts. The central one was a pregnant woman who I cast, and then a circle of phalluses in the middle. And the one on the right is their life after birth, which was a life cast of a baby and the woman's vagina all put together in a little coffin. And it was somewhat my comment on the society. I, as Jann mentioned, used humor, and often rather dark humor, but I felt that humor was very important, not taking either oneself too seriously, and also to kind of softening the blow when you're trying to, put that knife in on conventional beliefs. Next one, please. And these are some of my mouthpieces. I hear what you say, abreast of the situation, read my lips, all of these using my mouth, and the symbol of the mouth being a very attractive organ, but then now putting it together with other body parts and different kinds of challenging elements that would maybe make you look again. Next one, please. And at the same time as doing the collage, I was also working in 3 dimensions, and this had been my practice during my life to go between the 2 different 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and then mix them all, and bringing in the element of performance art into all of it, whether I was actually working in theatre or film or in these other plastic arts. I was always trying to combine these things. So these were done in wax, and in fact I worked with people at Madame Tussauds who helped me with the wax casting, and then I put other elements into it, like the insects and the eye, and the strawberry. Next, please. A few more of the life casts, and this one, Blood of a Poetess, is featured in the exhibition currently. Next one, please. If you can go to the next, yes. And then skip right on now to the present day. I'm now working on a series which had started a few years ago and will continue for longer, called My Body. And I'm very deliberately using my own body again as my muse at this time in my life, over 70 years old, wanting to confront that new bastion of feminism, which is ageism. And to say that, you know, at my time of life, I am still relevant, that we, the wise women, have so much to offer to the culture and society, which they're being deprived of by marginalizing us and to put us to the side because they're no longer the young, hot, magnetic women. So again, I'm using my body as the vessel for all of this and taking it through many transformations. And the one on the left shows a half and half between my old and young body. The one on the right is bringing in the dollhouse theme, which I also pursued during the 70s. And the next and last one, I made a series as a subset of my body theme called My Body in a Box, which has been my pandemic series. And I wanted to just references because of the association with food again on the left. And I use the box as a symbol of our confinement that we had been collectively going through during the pandemic, and looking at all the reflections that I saw within my box and which I thought reflected what the collective psyche was going through. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you so very much, Penny. That was, and Jann, both of you came through and gave us a wonderful survey of an incredible rich amount of work. And there are several things I think to bring out there in terms of the ways in which you're both dealing with the big questions that would emerge. In a sense, if we put Marilyn at the sort of the end of the great days of Hollywood and a certain kind of image, and everybody, the question of what it is that women do present when they are fabricated for the image, for the screen or the image. But behind that is always a working woman, and that's why I wanted to bring in the maid. Many of your works, Jann, involve this sense of somebody has to work, somebody has to make, somebody grows old, all these different other things. And you, Penny, have brought in, as it were, this other element of claiming back bodies, but minds and fantasies, desires, in ways that were so striking in the early 70s. And you mentioned Carolee Schneemann, you know, who obviously was one of the, we've had this sort of selective memory. We know there's, you know, Yoko Ono's cut piece, and then we have, you know, the scroll by Carolee Schneemann are kind of a little bit written into the story, but the incredible bodies of work that both of you have made. Would you like to say a comment to each other first, and then I'll open up with a few more questions that I have for both of you.
Well, I'm busting to speak, but it would take hours.
Speak.
Please do. I'm longing to hear what you have to say.
Well, I love the overlaps. It just is cracking me up, you know. It's sort of, I would want to say one thing that is common to us both, I think, that it struck me early 2003 or something like that, that women tend to make things that are put together pieces. I mean, if you think of the story of male art, it's a painting, it's a sculpture cast in bronze, so forth. Whereas it's this collective putting things together, and that includes involving other people in your work, which the theater, Penny, does, doesn't it? And the film industry does, that it's a collective. And I've always been very conscious of the collective acknowledgement that I'm a part my parents, I'm a part the man who makes the paint, I'm a part something else. And together with that, it's this thing of, if you have a baby in the next room, you want to be piece of art that you can pick up and put down, you know, or that you can come at because your life is a series of interruptions. You're not just in your ivory tower from dawn till dusk, working away in this privileged situation. It's not only working class, it's like, you know, real graft to get the moments to be able to make this art. You have to fight everything to do it because you're a woman and, you know, but the dishes need to be done. So I think this idea of collage as being a synthesis of disparate things, I love the fact of that you're the uniter of this. And that's very much about relationships and relationships to family and parents and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think it's a woman's art, synthesis, you know.
Yes, and I would say that, you know, when I joined the Women's Theatre Group, it was because I specifically wanted to do that. I wanted to step outside this, what I perceived as a very kind of egocentric art world, where people were trying to battle each other and compete with each other to get that place. And I really think that the new paradigm that we really need to bring in and hold and exhibit, and that's what I was reflecting back to you, that I saw you doing this so brilliantly and purposefully, is to be able to collaborate and to put away competition, which is really born for women, I think, out of this old style. There's so many powerful men around and we've all got to compete to get that piece of the men's power, and we need instead to help bring the best out of each other and to complement rather than compete. And so I think collaboration is a very key word that we need to model and exhibit. And right back there in the beginning of the 70s, it was like, how do I, you know, reach beyond myself and give my creativity into a pool so that then I can be part of something and contribute rather than just be stuck in this ego. Not that I wasn't going to go on and make lots of work myself, but I thought that was a really important counterpart to bring into the work process and to start seeing that we didn't have to do things the old way instead. And interestingly enough, when I was in an exhibition, the Virginia Woolf exhibition, the curator said to me, it's so interesting, you have talked about 2 other women that you thought should be in the exhibition. She said, men never do this. they never talk about how someone else would be good to include, but women are. And so I just think this is such a key point, an evolutionary point that you know, we can bring through here.
I think we might just jump back to the fact too of Marilyn Monroe and fame in that context, because fame is a singularity. I mean, we see the Academy Award speeches, people saying, oh, I'm going to thank my mom and I'm going to thank my kids and who put up with me and all that. And finally, at the end of the day, you know, they might say thank you to somebody who is ancillary to their own famousness. And I think I'd love to see fame demolished completely and have it be more something about contribution, you know, your part in commenting, contributing, building. You know, again, it's a synthesis. We all need to do this together, you know, if we're to survive, and nothing is alone. You know?
Yes, and seeing, you know, for instance, the similarities in our work and things that we share, and yet the complete uniqueness and our own approach. And so people, when they fear that someone is taking something away from them by doing what they do, this is nonsense, because we're each individual and we each bring our own reflection to this facets to the jewel. And that's what's so marvelous. And, you know, that's something to be celebrated. And I hope that this can become more of the trend as we move forward now.
Yeah, I agree.
If I could come in and pick up on that particular point, obviously, because what I hear you saying, Jann, also, in which why I put the sort of, in one sense, the photograph of Marilyn Monroe sitting, you know, in costume waiting, that in the cinema film industry or the cinema industry is a kind of huge industry of incredible creative people across so many different things. So when I taught my course to my students called The Complete Marilyn Monroe, borrowing what's his name, Adams's book, etc., we did a thing on about the dresses, and one of the students there was the daughter of a couturier, of a dressmaker, And she came and told us all the kind of complex things that Travilla and his workshops did, because there was no latex when she had her clothes. Everything was done through seamstresses to get the way it would hold and fall and had its internal structures, and then you talk about, the singing, right? Then you have the whole kind of the dancers, then you have technicians, and you have, as you say, your father, the production designer, the entire kind of visual concept that realizes the words and creates the spaces for the action. And all of those people are working in this huge thing. And then, of course, we have this, when Hugh Weldon says the stars, and maybe they're stars because of something, but it's not, it's to do with what you said, Hollywood is a kind of, called the dream factory, but it's also surreal, and in that sense, and all these amazing things like color. Like, I love the film The Girl Can't Help It, that sort of Frank Tashlin film, with which is going into cartoon culture as well. And it seems to me that one of the things that both of you bring out is not only collaboration at the level of making, that there's a huge sort of substructure that makes any of these collaborative projects work, like film. No actor acts for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a point, at any moment. 2 hours of, my daughter worked on scenes. You arrive there at 5 o'clock in the morning to set the set and set it up. They come in for 5 minutes, go back to their caravans and stuff. But that's beside. But they do then deliver. Which is one of the famous things that Marilyn Monroe worked so hard to deliver, and then got called that she was being sort of time wasting. But it was all to do with, it has to be absolutely right. And I know it wasn't good enough. I'll do it again, even 59 times to get it just right. But what I think is also is interesting is this kind of conversation. I mean, I was taught when I taught the 20th century, I was said to people, you can't teach abstract expressionism if you don't teach Hollywood cinema, because people go to the movies. If you don't listen to jazz, if you don't know what it is that people were doing in their leisure time. So there's this kind of conversation. But at the same time, you're talking also about the specific thing of a kind of ethos amongst women working together, being, I don't think it's entirely true that women are naturally not egotistical and mean and bitchy and all the rest of it, but I do think you're right. We both talk about, and maybe I could shift this back to the art school environment, to, particularly if I could go back to Jann, you came to London at a certain point when London art schools went from teaching Euston Road painting and sort of, being sort of just beginning to catch up with New York in certain categories. And there was this explosion of young people working with each other and mixing with each other and stimulating each other. And then, Penny, you obviously were at Chelsea, and it was a slightly different environment, but obviously going into film and theatre. But these are set up by women. These were women's groups. So I'm just wondering, what was it like being women in these environments in the early 60s, in the late 60s, as it were? If you could both talk to what kind of women's consciousness was being unspeakable in terms of ways of changing what you were doing and not just trying to be a clone of what is going on.
I think, I mean, at the Slate, certainly the women were marginalized, very much, as one of the tutors said to me at one point, there to keep the boys amused. And I think that was tragic, because it lost a lot of very talented people. But I think the atmosphere that I was aware of, I think, was absolutely, as you're depicting it, very much transitional, in that Hugh Weldon made a mistake saying that Peter Blake and so forth were doing pop art. They were doing contemporary art. They were doing popular culture, and that is different than pop art. They weren't emulating pop art, because pop art was just emerging. It didn't even have a name when Peter started working that front as some of the New York artists. And so I think, the concept of abstract expressionism was in direct contrast to the tutors at RCA, the Royal Academy, Central School of Art, St. Martin's, etc. The tutors were, not in that zone. Emerging, Tony Cairo and Philip King in the sculpture department at St. Martin's was like a big gut punch to, take hold that the tutoring became much more contemporary. And then the leakage of using popular culture as the centerpiece for an art piece. So Derek Bosher's Kellogg's Corn Flakes or the striped toothpaste, et cetera, the idea that entree of media, principally in New York, i.e. billboards and products and movie stars, etc. Whereas I think in London, it was much more kind of organic in a way. It reflected American culture and British culture, but in the popular arts. In other words, down market, as a publisher once described it to me, down market concerns, so looking at the working class entertainment, as you're saying, what people were actually doing, and what they were interested in, and figuring that in as just material for art. And you could say it was a still life of popular culture, through and through, because it wasn't Marilyn Monroe, it was the cover of a magazine, Marilyn Monroe. It was a movie shot of Marilyn Monroe. So in other words, you were borrowing from a secondary source, if you like, and saying that was the just concern for fine art. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Penny, you could come in there and...
Yes, well, I remember one time speaking to one of the staff members at Chelsea and saying, why is it that, it seems to me that a lot of the female students are just as talented, if not more so, than the male students. How come they're not getting to get ahead afterwards, and it's the boys who are getting all the spots? And they said, oh, well, we don't really like to invest too much in the girls because most of them are going to go off and get married. So, so just that comment. But for myself, to be quite honest, I was not, and I think this is why I wanted to work with the All Women's Theatre Group when I left college, as a counterpoint to what was happening while I was in college. When I was in college, I was very much wanting to be considered on the level with the boys. I felt that those were the only ones who were taking seriously. So I was competing with them, not with the other women. And even from then, I used to sign my name Slinger and not put Penny on it, just so that it was like without a gender, so that I could be considered in that top level group. And I was so excited by the teaching staff at that time, because at Chelsea, the part-time teachers particularly were all those young artists who were happening. And so my favorite teacher was Alan Jones, for instance, and I know he's got a lot of flack for, from the feminists, but for me, he was so unpatriarchal in his approach, and so funny, and so witty, and so intelligent, and so perceptive, that he always gave me the best feedback, and I even went and worked for him a little bit, making some of his pieces for him afterwards. So, that was the milieu that I was in, and I just wanted to find out, why is it all working for you? What are you doing? And let's go to the private views. Take me into the scene. This is where the culture is happening. I want to be at the Robert Fraser Gallery. I want to be in part of this scene. So that was really more my experience at art school. And so when I came out, I wanted to balance that out with working with women and giving my talents into that, because I hadn't really done that at art school.
Yeah, yeah.
One question I have, I'm very glad that you've mentioned Robert Fraser, because I think we do have to acknowledge the significance of, Robert Fraser's gallery in terms of the artists around the 1960s that you were involved with, Jann, and obviously Angela Flowers is a really crucial figure in platforming your work, and also many, many other women. What I'm interested in is this, okay, which is most of the, should we say, the great women of the 20th century were still alive in terms of the ones we might think of as the historic figures. I mean, you know, Helen Frankenthaler didn't die until the first decade of the second decade of the 20th century. Lee Krasner died in 84. Georgia O'Keeffe again in 78. I mean, when I went to study art history in 1970, I could have met them all. I could have met Gluck, who was one of the artists that I'm very passionate about. All of them were still alive, but none of them were put in front of me, right? And this is, and yet they were very well known. They were being exhibited. They had galleries. They, in everything, when you do it historically, to go back to kind of recover this, that they're not hiding away. They were continuing to work, but you as young women were not being given them as models.
No.
You know, now we think of you, both of you, as inspirations to a current generation of being present, not just as fitting in, but as actually turning the very groups that you were in, you know, the moment you were involved in a very, very strong way, and sustaining it over 20, 30, 40 years of work, right? Because you've both shown us work from the 60s and 70s right the way to the present. It's very sustained engagement with these questions. So was there something at that moment, you think, that made it possible to say, I'm not just going to try and be one of the boys, I'm an artist, I'm a woman, I've got to sort this out for myself?
But I felt like I was really the first woman doing this. You know, I didn't really have an awareness of many other women artists who were, for instance, saying, oh, I'm going to be my own muse. I'm going to see what it's like to look through a woman's eyes and express that. I didn't see it. And now as I look back and I research and I find out that there were a lot of women all over the world kind of beginning to explore these different zones. But at that point, I didn't know about them. And maybe this is because we were a pre-internet culture, but really that kind of cross-fertilization and availability of what other people were doing wasn't so present. As you say, they were maybe happening, but we somehow didn't see them. You know, I didn't see other women. I really felt like I was coming out into a man's world and trying to change the paradigm with what I was doing. What about you, Jack?
It's still, I think it's still the same. I mean, very often when you look at the lineup in galleries, you know, there are 3 women and 15 men in the listing of the artists. You know, it's getting gradually better, but you would expect in the arts, the most advanced, you know, sort of equality, and yet it's not the case. We still are way behind, but I think as far as being given the opportunities, I think one thing that I don't, in just this conversation, it's occurring to me that maybe we should think about is that what do we mean by being aware of other artists, in that fame has become such a cardinal point, and the secondary market and how much your paintings are selling for as the validation of your importance. And it's heretofore, it wasn't like that. I mean, you had little niches that you were in Paris and you were, you know, working together, Picasso, Matisse, Braque, you know, all of this, but they were more niches for a period of time, and then it would shift. You know, it was Rome before that. So our knowledge has been enhanced and handicapped by media, in that if the spotlight turns only on men, and media is our spotlight, then they are the currency, with the social currency that people use to speak about the arts or the theater or so forth. And I think that, you know, that trying to acknowledge that media has made a tremendous difference. I think of the Beatles as being a media product. Yes, they are amazing in terms of the music, but they hit just when media exploded. It went from radio to television to film to magazines. The magazines needed something to go in them, the color supplements. So they picked men because they were male editors. And, you know, the seriousness was in the male market. The money now, just like before, is in the male market. So, you know, but money isn't the important thing. And that's what we got to get away with. I mean, you got to get away from, you know, it's not the price of a work of art that tells you its worth. And that we need to crush that at some point, and go to content and process and say, what is the value there? And of course, that goes back to education, because you have to know what you're looking for and you have to have a framework. So yeah, all of that, hours of conversation.
Yes, and what we have now too, with all the social media, is another kind of currency, which is dangerous to be addicted to, which is the likes, you know, people doing things and putting it up, and are these things going to be liked? But to me, as an artist, you can't afford to think of anyone liking it. You've got to do it because that's what you want to do, and if they hate it, so be it. You know, you have to do it because that's what you're passionately drawn to do. And it doesn't matter if they like it or not. Yes, nice if they do, but you can't be doing it for that. And I see that has been the danger, the new kind of currency that is addictive for people.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that light, again, why do we go back into history? Why do we sort of excavate this moment between the 60s, when a certain kind of engagement with the world that we live in, ourselves, our images, our bodies, became sort of absolutely central to little communities of artists and grew up? And then again, why by the 70s did this almost in a sense make possible what we call a much more self-conscious feminist practice? Because I'm really interested in how shifting away from painting and sculpture in the kind of classical sense into film, performance, I mean, Laura Mulvey's talked about 16mm, 8mm film. Martha Rosler talks about the coming of video, the kinds of things that you were making as films. Penny, you know, there's a different kind of, I mean, still a huge cost in anything. You have to have the cameras and the lights and the crew and all the rest of it, but it's much more possible. And on the other end of it, you've got Jann making soft sculpture, right? Taking over a whole different kind of tradition of careful work, working with fabric, particularly, and with needles. And that's why I have that image and you and your sewing machine, you know, is a very important image there, etc. That something happens in this sort of period in which it becomes possible for us to have a feminist consciousness and this kind of what we then see it articulated in artistic practices. And I think you're picking up on something very important happens between the late 50s and early 70s. And if I go back in that light, in terms of Penny particularly, in some sense, your medium was the body, your you know, yourself, and you went in a sense far further, it seems to me, in exploring that, but by means of your engagement with Max Ernst and surrealism and the possibilities of collage. So we've actually got away from, again, the aristocrats into these areas where people experimented again in the 1920s and 30s, post-war dramatic changes, beginning with psychoanalysis. These seem to be important conversations, right? So I think there's something wonderfully psychoanalytical about cinema itself, surreal. I think also there's something very interesting about, you know, what I found, you know, when I went to the Flowers Gallery and saw it, you know, we were all sitting there saying, oh my goodness, you know, okay, we probably had a little bit of a sense of some of the body art and performance art. But you kind of emerged, seemed to me at that stage, like fully formed, saying this is going to ask you to think a lot about cultural mythologies, you know, the ideas of women's domesticity, the complete disappearance of women's sexuality, you know, and the idea that I'm a desiring being, that I have an unconscious, I have a fantasy life, and that my body is mine to use in a certain way. Whereas, Jann, you're making these very beautifully fabricated, but, you know, women's and old men's bodies as well. But that's why I like the, you know, the old women, I like the maid. There's also a sense of a body, but being not made with technical means like film or photography,
Mhm.
but with the piecing together. And there's a piecing in film. I mean, isn't there? You know, there's
Yeah.
always
Yes.
a kind
Cut.
of, always a kind of a piecing together. But I'm really interested in this question of the shift from almost, I was going to say, kinds of women's bodies and what kinds of work that are represented by your soft sculptures, and move on to your mannequins and your invisible women. And Penny's direct sense, I'll use my own body.
Right. Well, you know, there's so much in all that you've said here, and that interesting interface too between, you know, the medium being the message and the body. That if the body is central, and I always felt really the body needed to be central to me in the art because I felt it had been denied, and even in feminism, as feminism was arising at the time, there was a denial of the body, in the sense that I'd go to a number of meetings and didn't continue to do so because I felt a lot of the women were kind of operating from the neck up, and that there was a feeling that one had to not be sensual and sexual because that was somehow playing into the old paradigm and playing into men's fantasies. But my position was, no, we want the whole package. We don't want to be denied all of that. We want to bring all of this through. And I'm going to claim this. And as I claim it for myself, so all of you can look in that mirror and claim it for yourselves too. And it's like setting that example. And I didn't feel I could be really quite as ruthless with anyone else's body as I could with my own, because it was mine to do what I wanted with. And so I wanted to, you know, slice and dice that as well as display it. I wanted to reclaim the right for pleasure, the right to show our pain, the right to just be all of it. And that I felt that if we were going to rise as the female beings that we are, we needed to do it with all the glory of all of it. And just one comment on the films. I was probably more inspired by film than by the plastic arts at that time. I found so much going on in film that I would go to the BFI every week several times. I was really immersing myself in all the new cinema, where I felt much more activity in a sense was happening, and where there was a balance between male and female elements, because they had to have that interplay to make the films juicy and rich and attractive. So anyway, all of that, and I'm sure Jann has something to say.
I just call attention to something that struck me when I saw a surrealist exhibition at the Hayward in London, that André Breton said that all surrealists must go to Hollywood because it was the Mecca for surrealist thought. And I hold that in my head, you know, quite a lot, because it's that point between finding something very funny and finding it marginally dreamlike, marginally frightening, that kind of trying to catch that balance between those two things, which I think, Penny, you capture so brilliantly. And I love that point. And it's amazing that you're in Los Angeles now, because of course, now you were at the Mecca. It took a long time for you to get there, but you're there. So I think, you know, and maybe it's as simple as this. Most of my ambition is simply to get enough money to get through the next year. I have no ambitions, and in fact, no desire to be Damien Hirst or to be in that pool of stuff. You know, I need to concentrate on my work, and I want time to work. Pandemic has been kind of good for that. And, you know, my daughter and I and my son have had amazing opportunities despite the pandemic. And I think, you know, the idea of redefining as we come out of this pandemic, there is an opportunity. No doubt we'll see it in 40 years' time in hindsight, but let's remember the moment that coming out of this time, there is something, we can make something new. I hold the blue sky in my mind of the first days of the pandemic, first weeks, when we had a blue sky like we'd never seen before. And I think we have to hold that image to say, we are ready for change now. And change has all sorts of implications: equality, community, contributions, you know, responsibility, authorship, all of those things. And, you know, it's going to start from the grassroots up. It's not going to be from our governments, probably. And the arts is the kind of the canary in the cage. We see it coming, and it's our responsibility to actually try to make that a communication with people. So yeah, that's where I am.
Well, I do think, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just keeping a sense of the time, that I think it would be possibly, I'll give you the last word, Penny, but I think we could begin with open it up to some questions and answers from our wonderful participants who are invisible to us, unfortunately, through this mechanism. If you'd like to say one last thing, and then I've got one question that's already there, and anybody else want to put their questions to us in the Q&A, I think probably we've got 4 waiting for us, so
yes,
time to move to that.
Well, one quick comment, that I left the art world, although I didn't leave creativity. I never stopped working, but I became not so much part of it for the kind of reasons I'm sure that Jann is thinking about, the superficiality of so many things. But for me, at this point in time, it's part of my practice, because I found that being older now, I became invisible. And I think that it's very important, especially for our wise elders with the body of experience that they have, the women who have all this range under their belts now, to be able to have a platform and to be able to bring this into the culture and into the society to help affect the kind of change that Jann is talking about. I know that we need so badly. And if that is denied, then we remain immature and irresponsible and very one-dimensional, instead of having the breadth and depth that people with the experience that we have can bring to the table.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's both very, very beautiful and important statements from history to the present and through experience and encouragement. So thank you for the conversation. Let's now open it up a little bit. We have one very specific question directed to you, Jann, which is about the morning, noon and night cloak, which Julian, I think it is, thank you for your question, says the piece bears similarities to the cloak worn by Nita Pallenberg in the film Performance, and also one that later features in Lucifer Rising, for which I understand Jann made the signature Lucifer jacket. Was Jann also involved in contributing her cloak design for either or both films?
Yes, the cloak, I didn't know the Anita Ekberg one, but certainly at that time, you know, the latter part of the 60s, things began to get much more decorative. And you know, responding to that in terms of something I did that is in the Arts Council collection in Great Britain, Calendula's cloak, I suddenly discovered that I could draw something, i.e. make a quilt pattern in a drawing, cut the drawing up, and then you know, patchwork that together. So it gave me a great deal of freedom in terms of the shape of a patchwork quilt. It wasn't just then geometric. So that, and Kenneth Anger saw my work at Robert Fraser's, and he one afternoon came in with his to be Lucifer, the young man that he wanted to star in his film Lucifer Rising. And we had a conversation about the figure I'd made. Oh, well, there's another long story I won't go into now, but eventually he came to the apartment that Peter and I had and gave me a commission to make a kind of baseball jacket for Lucifer. And he didn't really specify anything other than he wanted a baseball jacket. So I made that for that film. And you know, various other commissions like that at the time that kind of interface between costume, you know, the rock opera Tommy, I've done 2 productions of that as costume designer. So I think, you know, that the piece is certainly referential to costume designers in the film industry, but it's also a continuum of taking a 2-dimensional thing and making you know, a drawing into a 3-dimensional thing.
Thank you very much. Just a more kind of general question, which is on the theme of the exhibition from Roxtopia, saying, who do Penny and Jann think might be or are the equivalents of Marilyn Monroe today? Do you think that's an answerable question? Do you have any thoughts about, because that requires us to understand who we think Marilyn Monroe is or was, which I have to say I'm still not clear myself how we should be thinking what that name stands for. But I don't.
Excuse me, I got a problem with her. Charlize Theron would be my Marilyn at the moment for the diversity of her performances and the adroit nature of her acting skill. You know, so yeah, I think that we have to wait so long before we get all excited about people. It's like, it's kind of, you know, in hindsight, we see things so clearly. I think we should appreciate things at the moment. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about this, Penny?
I don't have exactly on the tip of my tongue the equivalent to Marilyn Monroe, but I do have a role which I felt as a feminine role was very, very powerful, and that was a particular scene in Lord of the Rings of Cate Blanchett when she meets Frodo and the others, and there's a conversation going on, and the conversation seems to be happening on the outside and the inside both at once, that she's speaking directly to people's heart and souls, and then she takes Frodo, looks into her mirror, shows him what could be, and then he offers her the ring, and then she has to try and understand what it would mean to have that kind of power. And I think really this is a very crucial and key moment of what we're at now, is if the feminine is going to come into power, that how power is wielded. And we don't want that old kind of power anymore, because it will bring, as she showed in that beautiful scene, you know, the kind of destruction that's inherent in holding power in that way. But then she said, I will diminish. Well, I don't think we need to diminish. We just need to find new ways of holding power. So for me, that was a beautiful archetypal role and a wonderful role model for the intuitive feminine that she brought through there.
Yeah, not letting power corrupt you, the old saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, I think just I would add a little bit this question of, if we do not accept the iconization, but ask, how did, you know, a working class girl born in the Depression, you know, very much on the wrong side of the tracks, you know, motherless, fatherless, orphaned in different sorts of ways, dealing with mental health issues of those around her and things. How did someone produce herself to be able to produce things that now, photographically, and even in some of the films, we cannot forget? That seems to me one of the curious things. What was it that made, of all the huge number of Hollywood stars, women naturally exquisitely beautiful, fabricated to be incredibly, you know, cinematically beautiful, why is this the one that survives? What is it? And I don't think we know yet, because we don't have a language. And I think Penny one side and Jann on the other side of it. But I think it's an interesting question. But you don't have a Hollywood industry that produces stars. The star system, she's the last of the great stars of that 1930s and 40s era that she was formed in as a child. So I think we have, as you say, great, credible, wonderful actors, women actors, and we have also incredible moments in certain films when we can discern something else, a different kind of experience. And I think we have great women writers now, screenwriters, creating ways of exploring the world from women's point of view in all their diversity and complexity. There's not a single one, etc. So it is a difficult thing to answer, but thank you very much for that question. We have two questions also from Julian again. One is about, Penny, did you see the shows at Robert Fraser when you were a student?
Yes, and I think Jann was in the show, so that's we've got two different perspectives on it.
Right, and also also suggest the question of the Tantra exhibition. Now, this is an overlap. I think I sent an email to you, Penny, that one of the very early exhibitions I remember going to when I got to London in the early 70s to do my graduate work was the Tantra exhibition, 71. But I happened to go to it with a friend of mine whose girlfriend was away. And I got more and more embarrassed as we went around this incredibly erotic exhibition, thinking this poor man is probably in kind of agony as so much stimulation was going on. So I kept trying to be terribly art historical about it, but wondering what I was going to do with this just explosion of something that I'd never seen. I didn't know anything about this whole different, non-Christian, non-repressive way of understanding bodies and desires and, a whole different kind of physicality.
Yeah.
But you didn't perform at the Tantric, but you did see it.
That exhibition, I could say, changed my life and art. It took a few years for that transformation to happen. But when I saw the show, I walked in and I felt I'd come home. I felt like I recognized it in that deep way. And it was at a time when I was wondering, where do I fit in? Because although I was in love with the surrealist approach, it wasn't an active movement anymore. It kind of had that interactive time, which I so sought to have in my life and art at another time. And so I was looking for, where do I fit in the modern art movements? Where do I fit in the world of art now? And when I saw this exhibition, it felt like that was where I fitted. And so I spent some years looking for someone who could really teach me about it all the way through the depth and breadth of it. But it was through the art that I found the entry point, because it was the art that I thought I recognized. And it seemed like the evolution of surrealism. It felt like where surrealism was talking about the subconscious, this exhibition of Tantra was taking it to the superconscious, but the language was somehow the same. It was a continuity of that bypassed the mundane world completely and took you into these other realms of possibility and potential. And it felt very much about human potential and about finding a spiritual path, because my heart and soul always longed for the spiritual as well as the sensual. And here was a path which integrated more and didn't deny the sensual. It made it part of the liberation that I was seeking. And so that then became my practice. And when I found my partner, who I was with for 20 years, who was steeped in all that tradition and could tell me what I wanted to know about it all, that became the seed of the next blossoming of the phase in my art that came after that, where I tried to bring all that tantric imagery into my body and own it as my own, and put it out in a modern context, but with the essence of what it meant, and then made the book Sexual Secrets, to try and share with the world what for me had been so liberating, to find a spiritual path that said sex can be sacred. It's not something dirty and shameful and guilt-ridden. Forget about original sin. This is original ecstasy. And so I claim that as my own, and it really helped my whole being to heal from many wounds and be able to go on to the next phase in my life, and has become a touchstone for me ever since.
Thank you. That's a very, very important part of understanding the long trajectory. We have a comment from Claire Johnston saying, what work artists are expressing those profound and necessary themes that you're talking about. Can you, I mean, this is quite a big question. You talked about collaboration, equity, justice, community, even question with our responsibility to the planet, to natural resources, to actually thinking our commitment to continuing life on the planet. Are there any artists that you, or areas you see that work, or are we to look to your work in some sense for further study to get ourselves deeper into this? Because I mean, obviously, Jann, you are actively acting this out in the way that you work now with your collaborative projects and your community-based projects and in situ.
I feel that a single living artist certainly can't begin to cover all the things that occur to you that you would like to touch upon, you would like to do. There are only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, and I'm sure Penny, like me, works all of them that are available. It's you know, it's very important at this point, certainly in one's life, to squeeze everything out of time. But I turn to journalists as much as anything, or to contemporary writers that are writing in this area. I feel that the word possibly can get things across more quickly. I mean, we are talking now and dumping a huge amount of knowledge and experience into one small chunk of time. The word is so important. And so to me, I mean, reading documentary film, I can't say enough about Sundance and the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Labs, the film festival, the acknowledgement of documentary film. Really, all of this is the brainchild of Robert Redford. In 1997, he said he wanted to make documentary film as negotiable and important as narrative film. And look what's happened. I mean, it's just beyond words. So to me, I would point the finger to documentary filmmakers as, you know, the brightest light, perhaps, on issues that I'm sure are, you know, important to all of us, particularly me as an artist and Penny as an artist, you know, to be able to crack open that territory, I think is terribly important. I feel visual art is harder to get to the people that you want to talk to, possibly. And certainly we, you know, despite the Instagram and the defaults that the faults that we find with social media, it has to be said that people are increasingly visually aware, and the documentary film is a kind of blending of both the word and the visual that, you know, takes people forward. So that would be my beacon, I think, as far as, you know, progress is concerned at this point.
I mean, there's a way in which you might say that one of the areas of essay film that particularly women have taken up, which is not formally documentary, but the essay film, that has, again, this question of a personal voice, but obviously researched and addressed and formally made in order to explore these dimensions that, you know, are kind of exploded in certain kinds of ways, as we've seen in theatre and literature and photography in the 1950s and 60s, and then in a sense took a very particular feminist turn, and now have got sort of extended questions from post-coloniality to Black subjectivity to, you know, internationally migratory subjectivities, a number of different kinds of ways. The world is so complex that they're not centered in small art schools in London. It is on a different platform.
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, a very important thing, but I do think you're right. It comes back again to, in a sense, film as this sort of medium from both from Hollywood through to the surrealists and through to contemporary essay films. There are very, very crucial aspects of this. I think I have one other question here, which is from Kevin. Thank you very much for posing it. Ask both of you to think about, should artists feel compelled to defend their art once it's produced and displayed for public consumption? In sense, can you put it out there and then leave it there, or if it meets up with certain kinds of criticism? How do you think about that?
I don't think artists should feel compelled to do anything. They can do what the hell they like. And if if you want to defend it, so be it. You know, you can get up there and say what you want. I think you can work on whichever level that you want it to. But I think if you have made something that you've put your heart and soul into, so to speak, then you're happy to speak about it if given the opportunity. But some people are better in one form of media than another, and that should be the freedom for each of us to be allowed to present things as we wish. What do you think, Jann?
Well, you know, if you're attacked, yeah, you defend yourself.
Right.
You know, we see less and less of that kind of criticism. Robert Melville, who is a wonderful critic and a surrealist, he said he thought his job was simply turning on the light. He did this, he pulled the chain of the light. In other words, to sort of amplify and to acknowledge and to open the door on what someone was hoping to do, and whether that was in visual art or in writing or whatever. So you know, I mean, defend, no, I don't feel I have to defend. If somebody was in that kind of, had that kind of approach, it probably just would amuse me, actually. I mean, I wouldn't take it very seriously, I don't think, especially if they miss the point. So, you know.
I mean, because I come in there, and if you don't mind me, Kevin, having a little say about your question as well, which is one of the things from both teaching fine art students and teaching art history, I've always asked people to ask and say, what am I seeing? And start describing. You know, it's very large, it's quite small, I can hold it in my hand, I have to stand back to look at it. I mean, to go through very basic processes of allowing yourself to address what the work is, you know, and then what's it made with, you know, does it take a long time to make, what are its materials, why do you think it is this form, whether it's up on the wall or it's on the floor or it's a piece of film or something. And then you have to open yourself to ask not what it was intended, but what's it's doing, because the art work produces something that wasn't even there in the mind of the artist. The artist sets the parameters, gives themselves over to it, but I mean, artworks then do something. They're not just deposits. I think this, and I'm putting it in that with a pot of paint. There's a work, there's an economy, there's a sort of transformation that goes on, and what I hate most, you know, is critics who whiz into exhibitions and say, oh, this is disappointing, oh, it was like this, oh, I expect to be this, or this, you know, it hasn't done the same work as before, rather than just say, okay, so what is happening here? And you know, you open yourself to finding out what it is by some very basic, you know, descriptions, you know, how, you know, I mean, some things, I'm a great lover of Chantal Akerman's film. How long will I have to sit here? You know, why do I have to be here for 3 hours? Right? You know, why am I going to be watching it? Why am I not walking around? Why is it not on a TV screen? Why is it on a big screen? All of these things are all absolutely central to what it's going to produce if you start asking questions and allow it to do its work and not to start by judging or immediately extracting you know, content. you know. I think when people judge it, so that's why going back to your work, Penny, in one sense, the, George said, there are explicit images, but in a sense, for every woman in the world, this is not an explicit image, right?
Right.
And it's a very important sense to know your body. And, the famous feminist book, Our Bodies Ourselves, which was many women had never noticed what their bodies were like, were never allowed to look. In the 19th century, Catholic women had to bathe in a chemise. And their breasts were
Right.
called the sort of the Holy Spirits or something like that, because they never were allowed to know their body. And then you have the pornographically exposed body full of an angry exposure, a certain violence of opening up, as opposed to what your work is about. Well, this is it. This is, and I can do all sorts of things with it. So I think that's kind of more, whereas also with your work, Jann, I find very interesting this question of, we've talked briefly about soft sculpture, but that's why the ones I chose for us to put up are capturing bodies that you have to physically make with, silk, like the maid, or is it the maid that sort of has a sort of a substructure, and then, things, but you're also about poses and postures and physical bodies that deny the flesh, but the sense of embodiment and the meaning of gestures or situations that you're put in. And I think that comes to asking, why is it in cloth? Why is it with, how have you used, what do I feel when I see these bodies, which are very different from sort of Ed Kinholtz's or George Siegel's, trans bodies. They're all in the conversation with each other, but you're finding out what is specific to my deeply aesthetic, but also affective and then psychological and then intellectual relationship to this work. Once I ask, not what's it about, but what am I seeing and why was it made like that? And how is that trying to prompt me into a series of thoughts? So
I love that articulation. And I met someone here who was a drama teacher, drama professor at the University of Utah, and his analysis, and it's very succinctly put. He calls it perceive and reflect. And the perceive is exactly what you're saying. What is it? Why is it that way? What is it about? This also relates to work that Harold Cohen did at the Slade in the 60s, which was why? Why is that mark there? Can you justify it? His was more, Harold Cohen's was more of an attack in that you had to justify the mark to have significance. And I love that. I love being held accountable. So that kind of process appealed to me a lot. But I think you're right. And instead of a kind of almost bipolar, I love it, I hate it, I'm going to accept it, I'm going to destroy it. It's right or it's wrong. That's that sort of binary way of looking at things where it's sort of logically sequential and it is or it isn't. Whereas I think a more feminine approach is to say it's many things and it's many things to different people. I know my work will not appeal to people who favor abstract art. I'm not on their zone, and it's fine. I'm in someone else's zone. And I think that diversification in terms of art and art appreciation is something significant in terms of how we're looking at art today. And we have to say, many, many more people are going to museums than once they did, and looking into art history and looking at art in a different way. They may not be buying it in the same way, or collectors may be different, all of those worrisome things for artists. But I think, the vision has enlarged, and maybe women have contributed to that.
For sure.
Yes, and Griselda, I think that I just wanted to say, I think you're so right in talking about, the emphasizing the clues to inquiry, that you can help people by giving them clues, but it's all about inquiry into what reflection that gives you
Yeah.
when you look at
Yeah.
this piece. How
Yeah.
can you see yourself in there and what it shows you about yourself that you maybe didn't see before? And so it is that process. You're entering into this labyrinth which the artist has laid before you, and there isn't an answer and there isn't a justification. It's like, how do you navigate this? And a few clues can help, but really it's your own space that then you are given the opportunity to inhabit and to have this dialogue with the intention of the artist and how it meets you. And it's that meeting where it all happens.
Encounters indeed, one of my favorite words, the notion of encounters. Now we're coming very close to the end of our time. I thank you very much for those who posed questions. Thank you both, magnificent artists that you are, and I hope you have tempted people to read lots more about your work and about your histories, which are also very fascinating ones. And one of the comments we had in the chat was, could these two amazing women and artists write their autobiographies, because the stories of their lives are so interesting and their work. So please feel inspired by that. I hope our conversation has enlarged the tiny fragments of these two remarkable women who you have in front of you, the work of these two remarkable women, but also the other two, Pauline Botti and Judy Chicago, and inspire you to realize that if, in a sense, art has changed radically in so many ways and expanded, and we are kind of having a conversation of this kind of depth about things like embodiment, subjectivity, desire, choice, our own kind of working methods, it is because women have really ceased to be invisible women, have broken out of the frames, and are really such a force in late 20th and early 21st century culture. We must keep it so, and we must treasure you, great artists that you are, and treasure your work. I thank Griselda for bringing it back to all of us, and for organizing these opportunities for really in-depth conversations with two absolutely astonishing and wonderful, clever, intelligent, witty, thoughtful, insightful, caring, original, innovative, and remarkable artists. So please go forth and study both of them, and Pauline Botti and Judy Chicago. And I hand this back to George. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and everybody have a good evening. So George, if you would like to take
Hello, can you hear me? Hold on,
Yes.
some video.
Yes.
Sorry, where am I? The host has stopped my video. Well, listen, thanks ever so much. I'll just echo what you guys have said, really. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks very much for joining us as an audience. And of course, Griselda, what an honor and a pleasure to have you involved in this event. And Jann and Penny, we look forward to doing more stuff with you in the future. Please come and see the show. We're at 39 Dover Street, right in the middle of town in Mayfair. It's on until the middle of March. But don't let that stop you coming, because I do the same thing. I always go, I'll go and see the show next week, and I never do. So please come, 39 Dover Street. Come and see the work in person.
Okay, so snaps for everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. Brilliant.
My favorite film about blondes. Bye, Penny. Bye, Jann.
Bye.
It was
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.